Everyone is talking about Ferrari bringing a bigger rear wing to Hungary. They're looking at the wrong story. The real breakthrough isn't the wing itself, it's how Ferrari has changed the airflow before it even reaches the main aero surface. Those three tiny stacked winglets could completely alter the SF-26's balance through the Hungaroring's endless corners. And if Ferrari has finally solved that puzzle, Mercedes' championship advantage may have just become dangerously fragile. Formula One arrives at the Hungaroring with the championship entering a completely different phase. This is no longer simply Mercedes versus Ferrari on raw pace. It's becoming a technical arms race fought in wind tunnels, CFD simulations, and microscopic aerodynamic details that most fans never notice. Hungary, with its relentless sequence of medium and low-speed corners, rewards aerodynamic load, mechanical balance, and tyre management far more than outright horsepower. In other words, this is exactly the type of circuit where clever engineering can overturn an entire competitive order. But there's a catch. What the teams aren't telling us is that almost every frontrunner is bringing a decisive weapon at the same time. Ferrari has evolved its revolutionary Macarena rear wing. Red Bull believes it has finally solved its active aero instability. McLaren is preparing its own rotating wing solution, and Aston Martin has arrived with an almost completely redesigned B-spec car. What if this weekend isn't simply about winning the Hungarian Grand Prix, but about revealing who truly holds the technical advantage for the rest of the 2026 title fight? Before we move on, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you never miss out on any of our latest videos. Because once you see why these upgrades are designed to outsmart the airflow, not just the rivals, you'll understand why the Hungarian Grand Prix could completely rewrite the 2026 championship narrative. Let's begin with Ferrari, because what has appeared in the Budapest pit lane is far more sophisticated than simply bolting on a larger rear wing. At first glance, those three curved winglets stacked vertically ahead of the rotating rear wing almost look like decorative pieces. They aren't. They are aerodynamic guides designed to manipulate the airflow before it reaches the main wing. That distinction changes everything. Think of airflow as a river. Most teams try to build a better dam. Ferrari is quietly reshaping the river itself. The crucial detail is that these stacked elements generate additional upwash before the airflow reaches the rotating flap. In corner mode, when the wing remains fully loaded, they feed cleaner, higher energy air into the center of the rear wing, allowing the SF-26 to produce significantly more rear downforce exactly where the Hungaroring demands it most. That matters because Budapest contains very few long straights. Instead, drivers spend much of the lap leaning on rear stability through endless direction changes, where confidence translates directly into lap time. But Ferrari's engineers weren't chasing only maximum grip. The real genius lies in what happens once the active aero system begins to rotate. As the rear wing opens, that carefully redirected airflow changes the local angle at which the air strikes the surface. In simple terms, Ferrari is deliberately encouraging the airflow to separate earlier during the opening phase. Normally, flow separation sounds disastrous because it reduces downforce. Here, however, it's being used as a weapon. Less attached airflow means less aerodynamic resistance. Less resistance means the car accelerates harder on corner exit. And every kilometre per hour gained before the next braking zone compounds throughout the lap. Now notice something else that almost nobody is discussing. During the intermediate sail position, when the rotating wing sits halfway between maximum downforce and minimum drag, the new upstream winglets may actually reduce drag even further by aligning the airflow more naturally with the curved underside of Ferrari's rear wing. It sounds like a microscopic gain, but Formula One championships are built on microscopic gains. 1/10 becomes 2. 2/10 become pole position. pole position becomes clean air. And at the Hungaroring, clean air often becomes victory. That's why Lewis Hamilton's comments after Monaco suddenly make perfect sense. Earlier this season, he openly admitted Ferrari had been caught by surprise when rivals arrived with extreme, high downforce rear-wing solutions, while Ferrari had nothing comparable. At the time, it sounded like a rare public frustration. Looking back now, it sounds more like an internal warning. That warning appears to have triggered one of Ferrari's fastest development responses in years. Instead of producing a conventional high downforce wing like Mercedes or Red Bull, Ferrari doubled down on the philosophy behind its Macarena concept. Rather than adding downforce alone, the engineers focused on controlling how that downforce appears and disappears throughout the wing's entire movement. That's a subtle distinction, but it has enormous strategic consequences. Look closely at the technical images from the Budapest pit lane. The central tab extensions and triangular elements near the end plates are not random additions. They work together to manage the Coanda effect, encouraging the airflow to stay attached as long as possible before the wing transitions into its lower drag configuration. If that airflow remains organized instead of collapsing into turbulence, the driver experiences a far more predictable rear end when switching from braking to acceleration. That is exactly where races at the Hungaroring are won. Lewis Hamilton has always built his success on carrying extraordinary minimum speed into the apex before applying throttle earlier than his rivals. Charles Leclerc, by contrast, prefers a sharper front end and rotates the car more aggressively on corner entry. A rear wing that delivers smoother aerodynamic transitions could therefore benefit both drivers, but in completely different ways. Now compare Ferrari's philosophy with Red Bull's. Red Bull's rotating rear wing looked revolutionary earlier this season, but innovation without reliability quickly becomes an expensive science experiment. The team's active aero package suffered an airflow reattachment issue that disrupted the stability of the rear wing as it transitioned between operating modes. The result wasn't merely a slight loss of performance. The inconsistent airflow contributed to unpredictable rear behaviour, with Max Verstappen suffering costly accidents in both Austria and Silverstone. That forced Pierre Vacher and his technical group into an uncomfortable position. Instead of pushing development forward, they had to step backwards. The team abandoned the latest specification for the Belgian Grand Prix and reverted to the previous rear-wing package while engineers hunted down the root cause. Under Formula One's budget cap, that is more painful than many fans realise. Every redesign consumes CFD hours, wind tunnel allocation and manufacturing resources that could have been spent chasing outright performance. Ferrari, meanwhile, has spent that same period refining an aerodynamic concept that now looks increasingly mature. Notice the contrast. One team is investing its development budget into evolution. The other has been forced to spend valuable resources on recovery. That difference rarely dominates headlines. By the end of a championship, however, it can decide who arrives with upgrades and who arrives simply hoping yesterday's problems don't return. And then there's McLaren, the team quietly sitting between Ferrari's confidence and Red Bull's recovery. Its own version of the rotating rear wing was originally scheduled to appear in Austria, only for a technical issue on Lando Norris's car during FP1 to force the program onto the shelf. On the surface, that looked like nothing more than an unfortunate delay. But politically, it was far more revealing. It suggested McLaren wasn't yet convinced the system was robust enough to race. That's a very different philosophy from Ferrari. The Scuderia has continued evolving one core concept since Miami, gathering race-by-race data, refining airflow behaviour, and understanding exactly how the wing reacts under different load conditions. Every lap has been another experiment. Every Grand Prix has expanded Ferrari's aerodynamic database. That accumulated knowledge may now be worth more than the upgrade itself. This is why the Hungarian Grand Prix becomes such an important benchmark. Unlike Spa or Silverstone, where horsepower can disguise weaknesses elsewhere, the Hungaroring strips away those excuses. With only one truly significant straight and a relentless sequence of slow and medium-speed corners, the stopwatch rewards chassis balance, aerodynamic consistency, and tyre preservation. If a car suffers even the slightest instability on corner entry or exit, it pays the price through almost every sector. In other words, Budapest exposes the truth. That brings us to Aston Martin, whose upgrade package could be the most ambitious of the entire weekend. While Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull have introduced incremental developments throughout the season, Aston Martin deliberately chose the opposite route. Adrian Newey and his engineering group resisted the temptation to chase small gains, instead holding back resources for a comprehensive B-spec AMR26. This isn't a cosmetic refresh, it's a structural reset. Weight has been removed from both the chassis and gearbox architecture, requiring fresh homologation and crash testing. The rear suspension has been revised to improve mechanical grip. The nose has been redesigned to better condition airflow underneath the floor, and the aerodynamic surfaces have been extensively reworked to increase overall efficiency. Those changes aren't independent upgrades, they're connected. Reducing weight allows engineers to place ballast more strategically, improving the car's centre of gravity. A revised rear suspension gives the tyres a more stable contact patch through traction zones. Improved airflow strengthens floor performance without demanding excessive wing angles. Together, those gains create a car that is fundamentally easier to drive, and therefore easier to develop. That's exactly what Adrian Newey hinted at when he admitted Aston Martin's biggest weakness wasn't just the car itself, but years of underinvestment in simulation tools. You can hear the message hidden between the lines. The team isn't merely fixing today's AMR26. It's rebuilding the engineering process that will shape tomorrow's championship contender. That brings us to perhaps the biggest political story hiding beneath all these upgrades. Timing. Ferrari wants immediate victories. Red Bull needs redemption. McLaren is searching for validation. Aston Martin is investing in the future. 4 teams. 4 completely different strategies. One circuit that will expose which philosophy actually works. Now add Honda to the equation. While the upgraded power unit is officially scheduled to race at the Dutch Grand Prix, insiders indicate it will already complete a filming day run at the Hungaroring immediately after this weekend. That may sound insignificant, but in Formula 1, every kilometre matters. A filming day allows engineers to verify installation, cooling, vibration characteristics, and software calibration before risking a Grand Prix weekend. Remember the vibration issues that plagued the Aston Martin Honda package earlier this season? Those weren't just uncomfortable oscillations. They affected sensor readings, compromised aerodynamic consistency, and prevented engineers from trusting the data they collected. When your telemetry becomes unreliable, every setup decision turns into an educated guess rather than an engineering calculation. Honda now believes those problems have finally been solved. Shintaro Orihara's comments before the Hungarian Grand Prix were particularly revealing. He openly admitted Spa exposed the power unit's weaknesses, but Hungary would shift the spotlight almost entirely onto chassis performance. That's an unusually honest statement. Translated into racing language, Honda is effectively saying, if Aston Martin still isn't competitive here, the engine is no longer the main excuse. That's enormous pressure on the B-spec AMR26. And then there's the championship itself. Kimi Antonelli arrives with 204 points, holding a commanding lead. But Mercedes cannot afford complacency. Reliability has repeatedly interrupted what should have been dominant weekends, while Ferrari has steadily reduced the performance gap through continuous aerodynamic development. Lewis Hamilton sits just 45 points behind the championship leader. On paper, that's a comfortable margin. In reality, it's only 2 strong race weekends in modern Formula One. If Ferrari's upgraded Macarena rear wing delivers even 2 or 3 tenths per lap around the Hungaroring, a circuit where overtaking is notoriously difficult, that advantage could translate into pole position. And at Budapest, pole position often decides the race before the lights even go out. Suddenly, the title fight looks very different. The real irony is almost poetic. For months, rivals mocked Ferrari's obsession with the rotating rear wing, suggesting the Scuderia had placed too many eggs in one aerodynamic basket. Now, those same rivals are arriving in Hungary with their own versions of the concept, or scrambling to repair systems that never worked quite as intended. Formula One has always rewarded originality, but it rewards persistence even more. And this weekend, we'll discover whether Ferrari has simply brought another upgrade, or whether it has quietly forced the entire grid to play by its rules. If Ferrari's new Macarena rear wing performs exactly as the data suggests, Hungary may be remembered as the weekend the balance of power quietly shifted, not with a dramatic crash or controversial FIA ruling, but with 3 tiny winglets that almost nobody noticed. So, who do you think leaves Budapest as the true championship favourite? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive Formula One analysis.